The rumors are heating up for Apple's next major iPhone release. In this episode of the Macworld Podcast, we cover what's going on with the iPhone SE and what we could see in the next few weeks. Stay tuned and find out more. Welcome to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola here with Jason Cross.
Good morning.
And Michael Simon.
Hello, sir.
Apple's expected to release a new iPhone SE soon, and the reports of what to expect have been more frequent. So on today's show, we're going to go over the latest news and talk about how the iPhone SE could reshape the iPhone lineup.
Is this the first time since like 2016 that the iPhone SE has like a ton of attention? Like usually it kind of comes and it goes.
I think so, just because it was still rumored before the last, like as I recall, the first rumors for the last iPhone SE, the 2022 model. Yeah, 22, right?
Model, yeah.
The first rumors about that were that it was going to be like an iPhone XR-ish kind of thing. It was going to be a full screen device and all that stuff. And then those quickly went away, and we all kind of knew well before it came out, oh, it's just like the iPhone 8 body again. They're just stuffing a new processor in the iPhone 8 body. And even they didn't even update the camera module. It's just better processing because of the processor's better. So yeah, that one was a big letdown. It seems like they're catching up. They're not just giving us what we should have had last time. They're giving us that plus what we should have this time. It seems like they're catching up a lot.
When we were coming up with ideas for the show, it felt weird for me to dedicate a whole show to the iPhone SE. Maybe that's
there was a time. So back when it came out in 2016. So in September 2015, the iPhone 6 came out, and that was like at the time a really big deal. Apple, they released two sizes. They increased the screen size, and people were like, well, we still want that smaller iPhone 4, iPhone 5 phone. So they came out with the iPhone SE in the middle of the cycle. It was in March as well, and it had the iPhone 5S body, much like the iPhone 12 and 13 mini. All the people that like really wanted it, I don't even think it was that big of a seller because Apple got rid of it a couple of years later. It never got a second generation. And they just discontinued it. Let me look really quick. In 2018, they just got rid of it. It never got a new processor. It did get they bumped the storage, but that was it.
Yeah, and they didn't just like keep selling it until the second gen iPhone SE came out, right?
Right. So there was a gap, and then in 2020, which was right around COVID, it popped up that they were making a new one. There wasn't an event. It just kind of appeared one day on the website, and as Jason said, it looks like the iPhone 8. It's basically an iPhone 8 with a newer processor. 2022 came around, basically the same phone. It has a newer processor, a couple other internal stuff, but not much. It was basically a very, very minor revision to what was already an old phone. So now in 2025, it is ancient. I don't know who's buying the iPhone SE, but it is old, like old.
The first couple generations of iPhone SE kind of set up this pattern of, okay, every couple of years, that first gap was 4 years, but then we had just 2 years for the next one. But it was like, oh, okay, what Apple's going to do is every 2 or 3 years or whatever, in the spring, they're going to sell an affordable iPhone that is basically the 2-year-old body and camera with one camera, the 2-year-old body with just they're going to stuff the latest processor in it, and they're going to just keep selling that model for a few years, for like 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
And that's going to be their cheap thing. It's not going to get updated all the time and stuff. And then the last iPhone SE was just a huge disappointment because it wasn't that. It was the 4-year-old. It was like, oh, we're not even updating anything but the processor. You're not getting any of the stuff. And those were all big changes.
They brought 5G. That was the other major thing that the second one had.
And that's kind of a chip thing, right? Because it's like it's not millimeter wave, so it doesn't need new antennas or anything. It was just that's all the internal chip stuff. So yeah, iPhones had gone during the previous generation iPhone SE, the the second gen, in 2020, iPhones were going through this big revolution of like full screen devices and Face ID and all this other stuff. And the iPhone SE is like, okay, well, it's left behind on the Touch ID. And then to do that again,
Right.
2 years later was just awful. So like this iPhone SE catching up to all of that is just like a monumental shift.
Yeah, it's a big deal. There's a lot we know about it, or we think we know about it. But regardless of the specifics, it's going to be Apple's like real first like budget phone that's not like a major compromise or sacrifice for all these new features in and really like ever. Because even that first iPhone SE was basically a 6-month-old phone that they were selling. This is going to be an older phone. It's not going to be an iPhone 16, but it's going to look pretty close.
Yeah.
From what we say, and it's going to have a processor that's identical.
Right, and
a lot of the new stuff.
There were some rumors that it was going to be called like an iPhone 16e.
Yeah.
Some people nobody really knows. I kind of actually like that. If it's going to have that processor, just keep calling it an iPhone 16. If it's got Apple Intelligence and all that stuff,
right.
But yeah, I mean, in many ways, this is better than buying. Like outside of not having a second back camera, this is kind of better than buying an iPhone 15.
Yeah.
Like a regular iPhone 15, and definitely better than an iPhone 14.
Right. So that's the question. Like Apple forever has kept on to the previous 2 generations minus the Pro models. So now they sell the iPhone 16, the iPhone 15 is $100 less, and the iPhone 14 is $100 less than that. And then the iPhone SE comes in at $429. $429, $399 with a contract. So if you can get a $400, let's say they raise the price to $500. Well, let's like that. I think that's probably the most they'll go. That's still cheaper than the iPhone 14.
Yeah,
which starts at $599. So it's all like a interesting strategy thing to see what Apple does here. For the first time, like it makes sense to get rid of all of those older iPhones and just like the SE is the thing. If you don't want to spend $800 and up on a new iPhone, and there's a lot of people who don't, this is the phone to get.
Yeah, to just sort of sum up what the latest expected rumors and specs are is a body that is very much like an iPhone 14 with a OLED display, and the latest is it's not going to have a notch, it's going to have dynamic island, which would be wild.
Which would be an iPhone 15 because the 14 still have the notch.
Or 14 Pro, like 14 Pro, whatever, like who knows, something like that, but no action button.
Yep.
It's going to have a mute switch. Yep, USB-C, one camera on the back, but it's a 48 megapixel camera, and it's going to have that 2x sort of optical zoom, 12 megapixel like, crop zoom function. And storage, we don't know. I'm going to assume 64 gigs. Like, it would be really, really good if they moved to 128. That's what all the regular iPhones do, but they got to make this cheap somehow. I mean, it's weird because Flash is so cheap. Like they're already.
The iPhone 14 is 128, 15. So all of the ones Apple sells now, except for the SE, is 128. If they do up the price to $499.
Yeah, maybe it's 128.
Yeah,
if they
right.
raise
I don't
the
think
price that high.
It's out of the question. Yeah, particularly since Apple Intelligence needs space.
That takes up a few gigs.
You're using what, 10, 15 to 20 gigs or so?
Yeah. I don't know how big the models are with all the things, but something in the 6 to 10 gig range of storage. Yeah. So I mean that's I just described a phone that's kind of half of it's better than an iPhone 15, and half of it's not, but it's still better than an iPhone 14. So if they can sell that for $449 or something, then that's really good.
What's the top price Apple could charge before people start saying, a little too much?
God, it feels like there's no limit with Apple. Like everything's always more expensive.
Well, what do you like? What would give you pause? Like if you were a consumer,
$499 would be a lot for the SE. That's a big price hike.
Yeah.
for the iPhone SE, and Apple Intelligence isn't selling phones.
Right.
Like it's not like people are out there going like, oh, I got to get one of those new phones with the Apple Intelligence. People are trying it and mostly going like, it's not that great, or they're just laughing at how bad the notification summary is. So you know,
they got rid of them. 18.3 kills them temporarily.
Well, it just kills them on news apps, the apps in the news category.
Right.
All the rest of them still have it. It's italicized now, so that you know it's a summary. The new Siri stuff isn't out yet. Well, maybe that makes more of a difference for people. And of course, I think part of this is that they know they're going to sell this for a couple of years. That's why they're going to put an 18 in there, and it's going to get more AI features as part of iOS 19. Maybe it's 500, and 500 doesn't seem like a good deal now, but next year it does. Like next year, that's a good cheap phone. I don't know.
So the Siri stuff probably coming with the iOS 18.4, which
probably, yeah,
in all likelihood will arrive at around the time of the iPhone SE at that event in March. Mm-hmm. So like that will be one of the more marquee features to try out as part of Apple Intelligence, assuming the phone supports Apple's Intelligence, which it would be insane if it didn't. So like that's one of the things that we've checked off as like a guarantee, that A17 Pro processor with 8 gigs of RAM and full support
or an A18, a basic A18, which I think is probably cheaper for them to make than a 17 Pro. Yeah. Everything's having Apple. Even that HomePad thing that they're suggesting they're selling, which is supposed to be super, super cheap, they're cramming Apple Intelligence into that. Like everything's got to have it at this point. So I expect that's definitely going to be in there. It seems like a good SE.
Yeah, $499 seems okay to me. $449 would be
that'd be good,
really good.
That'd be an actual good price.
Yeah, that'd be like a straight up right. Like there's no reason to even consider anything else. If you, assuming you don't want the iPhone 16, or we'll talk about this in a minute, but the iPhone 17 coming in September, which also changes things again. Or rather changes the lineup. So if Apple goes with that iPhone 16e name, does that mean they're going to update it every year? Or
that would be awesome,
right?
I would love them to do that. I think that'd be great. But that's one of those things. There's no indication. There's no rumor. There's no like rumor that they're doing iPhone SE again next year. But we usually don't have them this early anyway.
Right. Isn't there a thought? I think it's a thought more by analysts that the iPhone SE is the phone that Apple uses to kind of grow markets and in emerging markets. So
that and selling sort of old iPhone, like an iPhone 14 or an iPhone 13 or something,
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea of keeping the price at a moderate level might be more of an incentive if that's really what they want to do with the iPhone SE.
Yeah, well, so the iPhone 14 sells for $599. In your opinion, that's in my opinion, that's a terrible deal. Listen, the iPhone 14 isn't a bad phone. It doesn't give you really anything that you can't get from the SE other than the screen. Like the chip is just as old. You don't have Apple Intelligence. It's gonna get the same updates, right? Kinda. It has a similar chip. I don't know if it's the exact same chip, but it's a similar chip. So I assume like when Apple drops support, the iPhone SE or the current iPhone SE and the iPhone 14 will end at the same time. So they're very similar investments in my mind. But I think people are still buying that iPhone 14. Apple wouldn't keep it around if people weren't buying it. Could Apple go as high as $599? I guess is my question for the iPhone SE.
That just seems crazy to do that and keep any of the other phones around. Some of this, I think, depends on how well and at what price Wistron is able to make it in India. There's the iPhone SE is manufactured in China by Foxconn, but also by Wistron in India for the Indian market, because the Indian market has a lot of import tariffs on certain things and stuff. So making something in India is the way to tackle the India market, which is a huge enormous growing market. So I think it's about, I think a lot of this is about what can they make there and for how much. Like, I think that's going to be a kind of a determining factor in how much does this thing cost.
So maybe we should talk about the lineup. If this SE does come out and with the specs we expect it to have, so do you guys think the iPhone 15 and the iPhone 14 that are currently in the lineup get dropped by Apple?
I mean,
The
so
14's got to. I think the 14's
definitely.
got to. Yeah.
but sorry. So let's say they keep around the 15. The 15 starts at $699.
Yeah.
And won't have Apple Intelligence. Will have if it has a dynamic island, it's going to look almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
You're paying for an extra camera
Maybe more, and maybe more storage.
and maybe more storage. I mean that seems like a confusing comparison to sell it, especially if you're marketing the iPhone SE or 16e or whatever they call it
Yeah.
as new. I think if the rumors of the iPhone 16e name are correct, it signals to me that Apple is getting rid of the 14 and the 15, because then it makes no sense. Because you have a 16 that's less expensive than the 14 and the 15 and has better features, but it's just way confusing to me. If it's an iPhone SE, still fourth gen iPhone SE, maybe they keep around that 15. It makes sense to me to get rid of everything, clear out the line, have a $499 or $449 iPhone SE. Just market it as everything runs Apple Intelligence, and these are your options. Maybe next year the 16 sticks around, because then we're talking about more features and a better phone. But I think the 14,
camera control, all that stuff. Like it'll have stuff that
right. I mean, the 14 still has Lightning, right? Like we're talking about that's got to go. The 14 has to go.
I have a hard time imagining them keeping the 15 too, because I kind of think they want only products that support Apple Intelligence in the lineup.
Yeah, so the only ones that don't right now are the SE and the iPad, the 10th gen iPad, which is also supposed to get an update right around the same time, if not exactly the same time. And then everything else except for like Apple Watch will run Apple Intelligence, all the Macs, all the iPads, all the iPhones. So yeah, it makes sense to get rid of it. I'm surprised they didn't just do this SE in September and have everything, come out at the same time.
They weren't ready. They didn't have enough A18 processors or something. The only sort of advantage of the iPhone 15 right now is that there's an iPhone 15 Plus. It's a cheaper big phone. There's not going to be any iPhone SE Plus big phone. If they do get rid of all that, your only large phone anymore is an iPhone 16 Plus. There's no large phone at any price cheaper than that. That's the only reason I can think that they would want to keep around the iPhone 15 if half of what we're hearing about this new iPhone SE is true. I agree with you, Roman, that it seems like an Apple thing to say everything's got to run Apple Intelligence. Like they've made this decision. It's going to be
for sure.
And they're going to worry about the transition to still selling 9 different iPhones, including old models and stuff like that. That'll fill in again over the next year. Right. As new models come out, we'll once again be selling iPhone 16s and 17s and SEs. And
so we go over the specs real quickly. We've gone over it a little bit before.
Let's go through it from top to bottom.
Yeah. So we think it probably will have an A18 processor.
A17 Pro or A18. So the A17 Pro is in the iPad Mini. And I think that's it.
I'm gonna say that would be
probably the A18.
It would be weird because they won't want to keep manufacturing A17 Pros. It's made on a old TSMC 3nm process that was more expensive and more difficult to manufacture. The A18 is a more economical chip. I just don't think it was ready in time for the new iPad Mini. In the volumes, so and they'll
have like a bunch of, because the A17 Pro and the Mini is like a stripped down version of the A17 Pro. Maybe they just had a bunch of
they're kind of reclaiming things, but they update the iPad more often. They're not going to update this for like 2 years. I don't think it's going to have a 17 Pro. They're not going to be manufacturing 17 Pros in 2027 to keep cranking out iPhone SEs.
Right. Yeah, that's probably true. Plus, it makes sense to have them all on the A18 at this point,
Right.
anyway.
We have no idea what the storage will be, but we were just talking about it. Or
I'm
maybe
going to plant my
128.
flag on 128 gigs
I think
because that's like Apple. Like they've done that for long enough now, where it would
yes.
be weird to go back to
Yeah.
64 gigs.
I hate it. Yeah, but at the other hand, I also know Apple will be cheap with storage just to upsell you storage sometimes. So I think it's entirely comes down to price, like a price point they want to hit,
Yeah,
so that they
I
can
agree.
say this. But then you really end up going and spending more anyway because you end up getting the 128.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, they could. It would just maybe. I don't think they make any other devices with 64, right? The iPad, the 10th gen iPad.
Trying to think if an
Is
Apple
that 128? Hold on.
Apple
I know
TV.
the iPad Mini was, and they updated it just last week. All right, hold on. Bear with us, audience. I think it's 128 for the iPad, but I will find out right now.
Well, I mean, it's not
No,
exactly
it's not. The 10th gen iPad is 64.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
not exactly a normal iPhone, iPad, but the Apple TV's got a 64 gig model.
Okay. Yeah. That's
It's not exactly the same thing, but
right.
Not that users care about this, but this iPhone SE is supposed to be the first phone with Apple's own 5G modem.
yeah, that'll be interesting to watch what happens.
So,
Just for us people who like,
Yeah.
for
care
your
about
regular
5G
consumers,
modems.
regular consumers won't know or care who makes the modem in their phone. They don't know
Yeah,
now.
I don't think
Yeah.
Apple's even going to bring any attention to it. Like, we'll see it. iFixit will have a teardown, and they'll talk about it. But I
Yeah.
highly doubt Apple mentions it in the presentation or the press release.
I think what'll happen is sometime in late next year or the year after, Apple's third generation modem or something like that, they'll be able to claim it's so much better than Qualcomm's, and that'll be
Right.
the first time you hear
Right.
about it.
Sure.
When they're like, oh, and it's got our own modem that's so much faster and better. And blah,
Right.
blah, blah.
Yeah. It'll have USB-C, Apple switching everything over to USB-C. Oh, I haven't mentioned the size. So it'll only come in one size. And that's what is that 6
We assume 6.1 inch, which is the lower end, but we haven't heard. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that there's like a iPhone 16e Plus, because they do sell two sizes of the 14 and the 15. Again, we haven't heard any rumors about it, but maybe.
We've talked about the camera, how it's only going to have one camera.
So here's a question for you guys: is that a deal breaker? Because I don't think it is. To have
For me, it's a
one
deal
really good
breaker.
camera.
For me, it's a deal breaker, but it's only because, I rely on my iPhone to take
Yeah.
photos. So, yeah.
I think for its intended market, it's not.
Right.
I think if anything, if they were going to invest in more camera for this phone, I would say making the front camera better, bigger, whatever, would be where it matters more. And there's rumors that like in the 17s coming up, they'll be moving to like 24 megapixel front cameras. And,
Right.
I don't know if this has the wide angle one, if it's got a dynamic island and the version of the true depth module that's in that, it probably does. But yeah, I think for the market that this is intended for, 148 megapixel good rear camera that does night mode and all that stuff, has the 2x zoom, and then really good front camera that's appropriate.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I moved from the Pro to the Plus this year as sort of an experiment, and I can count on like one hand how many times I missed having like a dedicated zoom lens. Now the wide angle versus ultra wide, that's different, because there's more uses for that. But I think as long as it's a good camera and has night mode, it should be noted the current iPhone SE does not have night mode. It definitely needs that.
Yeah,
that's something that I would miss. But as long as it has a 48 megapixel camera with the smart HDR5 and all the things that it comes with it, portrait mode, and has night mode, I think that is more than just good enough. I think that's really good as far as what you use, you're taking your phone out, snapping a picture, putting it back in your pocket.
Yeah. And it's, I wonder if it has Apple Intelligence. but it doesn't have a camera button. I'm going to guess it doesn't have the visual intelligence feature of Apple Intelligence. The iPhone 15 Pros don't. I think that's a camera control feature.
It seems to be, yeah. It seems to be.
Even though it isn't, it's just software that you just launch it by holding the camera control. There's no reason they couldn't make a control center button or something that opens it.
Right. I mean, they have to have some features that are exclusive to the newer phones.
Right. Yeah. So they tie that to the camera control hardware, even though it's not. There's nothing specific about that. So yeah, I think that's the only kind of thing that would be missing from that equation, and that's fine. It's okay. You got to do something to make it the cheaper. Otherwise, why are you even buying an iPhone 16?
Right.
At some point, why are you buying an iPhone 16? I mean, my wife switched to the non-Pro when she finally replaced her. I mean, she had like a 13 Pro, but she's not missing the zoom thing. I mean, she cares more about the wide angle because it's macro. She wants to do macro shots, and now that the 16 does
the macro is
macro,
a big one. Yeah, I'm gonna assume the iPhone SE doesn't do macro.
It's macro is tied to the wide angle lenses, so I would assume not. Yeah, and the regular 48 megapixel standard wide doesn't have a focal length short enough to do those macro things.
And then one major feature that I think a lot of people are going to be in arms about. I was trying to make a pun, but Touch ID might be gone.
Yeah, I think we can safely assume that it will be gone. Yeah.
So no more home button.
I've known a few people who were sticking with their old phones and loved their Touch ID and didn't want Face ID. But I would say in the last year and a half or so, most of them have upgraded their phone just because their old one got too old, too damaged, and you just can't get a Touch ID phone. Like they weren't even looking at the iPhone SE. They just go into their carrier store and they get say what's cheap, what's the free phone I get for extending my contract or whatever. Yeah. And they get Face ID and they complain about it every now and then. And then I go like, well, but like, what do you do? Like when your hand's wet, like you can actually open your phone. They're like, well, yeah, and they don't seem to have any trouble doing it. So I think it's that whole thing where it's like, that was a real breaking point for people. We may have gotten past that just from aging it out. Yeah. Just from people. I don't think that's going to be as bad of a sticking point.
I was talking to somebody who was telling me how much they hate Face ID. And the one example they gave me was when I'm in my car and my phone's mounted and then my phone locks and I have to use Face ID to activate it, I have to move either my face or the phone so I can be in range for Face ID. And I'm like, dude, you're driving. You're not supposed to. He was like, that's why I want Touch ID so I can just reach over. And I'm like,
that's an extremely niche case for Touch ID.
Right. I mean, and if you've got your maps or whatever open, your phone's not going to lock. Like all those apps keep your phone on, so you're just texting while driving or something. Exactly. Like, no, what are you doing?
He was on social media while he was driving.
That's even worse.
Without the home button, the Touch ID would have to be built into the power button, which is, in my view, a bit more difficult to access than the home button. So Face ID is superior to that method, I think. At least it is on like the iPad mini.
It's just also, it's more secure. It works when you have gloves on, which, anybody who has a winter, like they make gloves that are touchscreen gloves, but it's not like your fingerprint goes through that. So.
Yeah, and it's super, I mean, it's like milliseconds. It's so quick now. I mean, it always was, but it's gotten even better over the generations that they've improved. It's excellent.
What other major features have I glossed over? I think
that's basically that's the thing about the iPhone SE is it kind of doesn't have major features. Right. Like that's the whole point of it, is that it's kind of, it's last year's technology, not even last year.
Bare bones, but it's good enough by a wide margin for most people, and certainly better than most like budget Android phones that are in the class.
Yeah, but to be fair, those are usually much more budget.
Like $200.
Yeah, they're like $200. Like a $500 Android phone. It's comparable. Okay. It's
I agree.
Apple's budget phone is everyone else's mid-range phone. It's like buying a 3-year-old iPhone or something that you know is still going to get software updates for a long time because it's got a new processor, and that's kind of the point of it.
We don't know what colors Apple has stuck in the past to black, white, and red. Who knows? Like we haven't
been doing
colors.
The reds were product red, which is like an age thing. Yeah. They haven't done those things in a bit, so we may not get it.
So,
yeah. So if the current iPhone SE is a 4.7-inch phone, and if you love small phones, you better go run out and buy that phone.
Well, so comparable, like dimension-wise. Even though the new phone has a 6.1-inch display, it's not that much bigger. We're talking about a couple millimeters in every direction because there's more screen, but using it changes. Like the way you access, like your thumb moving over to the bottom and top, and like there's more screen to work with. But as far as fitting it in your pocket, as far as the usability and the handling of it, it's a little bigger, but not tremendously bigger where you're going to say, "Oh my God, I hate this thing."
Yeah, you're not really you can notice. It's not like getting the plus size model phones, you know.
But it is like you're gonna have to change your thumb and the way you move it around because it's harder to reach the top of the
compared to our current iPhone SE for sure, because they also have a big forehead and chin.
Right. That's
so there's that too. There's that plus the whole phone being larger.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. I was reacting to the numbers comparison when I wasn't actually thinking about the whole design.
I mean, it's a substantially larger screen. Like if you watch movies on your iPhone SE right now, I mean, it's going to be like, wow. It's a big difference.
Yeah, the whole aspect ratio changes. You've got a whole completely different.
Yeah, and if you get if it does have the dynamic island, which is the most recent rumor from this week, that brings a whole other interface element to your phone with live activities. You can track sports scores, you can track flight arrivals, you can track alarms right in the top of your phone. So that's a big change as well.
I love that when traveling. I love most of the like United Air, American Air, one of those apps and stuff support it, and you'll get it'll show what your gate is like right up there without you having to even tap on it. Like that's what shows when they're before it boards. Once it boards, it shows how much time is remaining in your flight and all that other kind of stuff. You know, that's exactly what I want to see.
And if you watch sports, it's fantastic. It just kind of like as a game starts, it'll pop up there. You don't have to go into the sports app or the NBA app or whatever it is that you watch. And you don't have to really track it. You just kind of glance at like, they're losing 3-1 or whatever it is. It's cool.
And it keeps it up to date pretty quick.
Yeah.
So we're expecting Apple to make an announcement in the next few months, possibly at a spring event, along with
maybe March.
A few other products.
Maybe April. We've had spring events in both months, so it's hard to say. Last year they had the event in May. The iPad event was in May, so we don't really know. It's between those 3 months. Spring is a long season for Apple.
But we expect to see more rumors as the event approaches.
Yeah, there's not a lot we don't know, but
we'll know everything about it. Before it's announced.
We kind of do now, although the dynamic island this week threw a bit of a monkey into the wrench because we were expecting a notch all these months.
Threw a monkey into the wrench.
Wow, that's a visual. That's a visual. That's worse than that iPad scrunching video that Apple did.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, that was a surprise, and we're not even 100% that's accurate, but by the time this thing comes out, we're gonna know almost everything.
Yeah. We would have normally ignored that, but the guy who leaked it, Evan Blass, he's a long time phone leaker and
it comes
sources. So,
and it comes from one of the icon thumbnail things, right?
Yeah.
Originally, so it comes from some Apple artwork where it's like, oops, this is the iPhone SE graphic, and it has dynamic island. There is what was I going to say? With the iPhone SE compared to new iPhones, like new iPhones sometimes have a software surprise that that doesn't leak. That doesn't really happen with iPhone SE. So we'll know all about it.
Right. It'll probably ship alongside 18.4, as we were saying earlier, which brings a few new features.
Yeah.
But nothing that we don't know about already. I'd be surprised if there was anything that, like, oh, that's interesting. Like, we're going to know what they're going to talk about as far as the interface goes.
If you want more information on the iPhone SE, we have a page on our website that tracks all the rumors and reports. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. That does it for this episode of the Macworld Podcast, episode 918. Thanks to Jason Cross.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael Simon.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks to you, the audience. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to the Macworld Podcast in the podcast app, on Spotify, on YouTube at the Macworld Podcast channel, or through any other podcast app. Do you have any comments or questions? Send us an email at podcast@macworld.com or contact us through Blue Sky, Facebook, Threads, or X. Just search for Macworld and look for the blue mouse logo. Join us in the next episode of the Macworld Podcast as we talk about the latest in the world of Apple. See you next time.